right. Wow, this is episode number 84, you all. I cannot believe it. It's been going on for a while, and I look forward to this time every single week. Usually I'm running from a track event. Ironic that I don't run. It's not my track event. It is my child's track event. But I'm usually running from a track event to get here, and I'm really excited about it every week because I really started thinking, I calculated there's over 100 hours of professional learning opportunities from some of the most remarkable human beings in this field and work. And so I hope that if you may be new to listening, you go back and listen to some of the previous podcasts, because there's a ton. I even found out that there's now, I know, 5 to 7 universities using the podcast as part of their postgraduate curriculum. And that to me is awesome because now we're actually getting into universities and having people speak. I do want to remind you all before we get started that the 4th annual Trauma Informed Educators Network Conference virtual is June 22nd and 23rd. And you all, it's going to be it's going to be amazing. We have our keynote speakers, Dr. Lori Desautel, who has been on this podcast twice. She has written multiple books and brings a ton of expertise. We have the relentless school nurse, Robin Cogan, who she has, given that was recently happened in Nashville, she has had some firsthand experience of gun violence and has a amazing plethora of knowledge in how can we do it differently, but from a school nurse's standpoint. And then, of course, if you all know me, you probably know my partner in crime, Dr. Ricky Gibbs from Warner Elementary School in Nashville, will be bringing down the house with his fire, the same fire that got him kicked out of 4th grade in elementary school. He now uses, like myself, we use our powers for good. But anyway, enough about that. Make sure you go to tienetwork.org and register if you are ready. You all, I can't wait for you to hear from tonight's guest. She and I have been friends for a long time, and we go way back, and we've shared a lot of conversations. And she reached out to me and she said, "Hey, what do you think about having me on the podcast?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." So tonight you're going to hear from someone who is near and dear to me, but brings such a plethora of expertise from lived experience that I know you all will appreciate. So welcome, Dahron Johnson, with a hospice serving Middle Tennessee throughout her career in faith spaces as much as clinical and research ones. She has advocated persistently for keeping the voices of patients and their communities of care central to their own journeys. She is the chair for a regional community advisory board for the LGBTQ health, a member of a statewide council focused on resources and support for those with intellectual and physical disabilities, and serves as a community member on the board overseeing research efforts with veterans. Dahron also works closely with the Tennessee Equality Project, which we will talk about later, supporting their community education outreach efforts, as well as testifying before the Tennessee General Assembly, Senate, and House committees on multiple occasions. And before you get started, I want everybody to Google those talks to the House and Senate committees. You want to be inspired, you want to be lifted up, and you want to put your fist in the air in support of a fierce advocate. You will need to do that. So welcome to the podcast. Tell us your story.
Well, Matthew, it's so lovely to be here with you and with all the listeners and viewers this evening on the Trauma Informed Educators Network. I reached out because I have long been an admirer of the work that you have put into helping folks understand what it is to be leaders and to be partners and to be co-journeyers with those who carry hurts over their lifetimes in ways that we often don't recognize, and how one looks to bring that into making one's classroom better, making one's homes better too, right? And I'll say, I'm not one to lead with negative as far as my own personal experience goes, but I have to say an added reason why I really was interested in um, coming on the show is because the experience of being trans in the world carries its own unique set of challenges that last over a long lifetime and that often go unrecognized, maybe intentionally so by the person who's carrying them, but they go unrecognized by the person around them. And so having a forum both to discuss those things and to be able to do it in trusted and lovely company is something I'm really grateful for. So thank you for that opportunity. As you laid out already, I am a chaplain. I've been offering spiritual, emotional, and existential support for patients in their communities of care for just at 15 years now. I started at the VA. I was there for just about 3 years, and then have gone on to work in a variety of hospices in the Middle Tennessee area. Also served with the ministry team with a historically Black congregation here, as well as the other things that you listed in the bio. I'm also the parent of a lovely, loving, and lovable autistic young man who I also try constantly to make sure that I'm attentive to the ways that his difference in the world and the way he's different from me, that I don't stay don't stay blinded to the ways that his different experience of the world may make his hurts less visible to me. And that has been, being a parent to him has been absolutely transformational for me. If nothing else, because I realized in being an advocate for him and being an advocate for the way he exists in the world, that I needed to step up and do a little better job of role modeling that for my own existence in the world. And so being the proud parent of such a lovely autistic young man really provided the pride to say, you know what, you you could be doing this a little bit better for yourself as well too. And that's been absolutely lovely. I turned 53 in just a couple of weeks. I came out when I was 50 years old, back right at the beginning of in January of 2020. Slowly but surely, step by step, with this person and that person, right? And that means, though, that for 50 years, or a good chunk of those 50 years, I was carrying around this sense of this interior self that I knew to be true, not matching with what I was being told from the outside as being what other people perceived of me. And that's a really difficult mismatch to carry, and one that I contended with for decades. I think I was fortunate in having parents who were so affirming of who I was. You know, I had parents who would say, you know, whatever you want to be, we'll be there for you, right? The problem was, because I didn't have positive descriptive language of how to be this person in the world, what I couldn't reconcile, and that was a pretty grievous hurt to carry for a long time, was how can my parents be so affirming of who I am, and yet I can't even find language to be affirming of myself. I can't find language to create positive definition of myself. I can't find a way to say, I am this person, rather than leading with, I am not, I am not, I am not. And then, oh, by the way, I am this other thing. I have, since the moment I recognized that I was a self among other selves, I knew that there was a difference between how I perceived and understood myself and the way the rest of the world did. So that's never been the issue. The issue has been, how do I find that language to be able to claim a positive sense of self and to live for, let's say, 45 of my 50 years up to the point where I started coming out, where I was having to deal with that discordance. Man, that's heavy, right?
And you helped so many people through grief, and yet that internal grief was happening within yourself. And I'm not going to say his name, but I've gotten to watch your amazing son grow up from being itty bitty, um, being taught by a teacher that taught at the school that I was, to the last time I saw him going, how did this happen? How did this happen? And watching him grow through you and your social media, I mean, and the fact that he provides you so much inspiration, I as a parent, I feel that so deeply, because my son navigates the world in such a way that I'm so proud. So proud when there's things said at school and he's like, Dad, I asked him, why are you using that word? Like, that doesn't, that don't even, like, why are you using that word? Those things make me so proud. And I can only imagine from my own experience just how proud you are of the amazing, now he's just pretty much grown at this point. grown man that you have in your house. But let's get into the work that you've done, because
sure,
I think it's important, and I think it's a topic that we don't talk enough about, especially when we're talking in the context of trauma-informed education, when we're talking in the processes that people go through, when we're talking about grief. And grief is a process that we all go through throughout our lives. It's not something that just happens from one particular event. Grief happens, to be honest, often in a lot of our lives. Sometimes I experience it daily, right? So when we say grief, what is grief and how does it impact individuals, as well as this collective idea of grief as a community, as grief as a society, as grief as a state? How does that look from an individual to a collective?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of layers there, and we'll start at kind of some ground level sort of definitional stuff, and then we'll work out from there. I think you were right there with your bumper sticker slogan, as a matter of fact, right? Grief happens, full stop. And it happens, as you were saying, pretty much all the time. I mean, maybe we shouldn't take the word of a hospice chaplain who does grief and bereavement stuff all the time as gospel on this. Maybe I'm predisposed to look at the world through a grief lens, right? But I would say, let's take that journey for a second, and let's think about the ways that we experience loss and that we experience change, and how that might tell us something more about grief, right? I'm a big believer that any type of change is itself a type of loss, right? We were at thing A, we had thing A, now we're at thing B. Maybe those are small potatoes things, right? Maybe they're the type of things that we push to the back burner. We had hoped to be able to get, we hoped to be able to get the bank on time before it closed, but we weren't able to, right? But there's a little loss there, right? Or the road that we travel to work every day, and we always like looking at this one house because of, the bird bath in front of it, and that's just part of our morning routine. And that road gets shut down, and we do something else. And there's a little loss there because there's a little change there to a routine that we had some value in. And we don't think about those things consciously. We don't contend with them in a conscious way or deal with them in a conscious way, but they do accumulate. And then when we have the sort of larger grief moments in our life, grief occasions, the close of a relationship, the change of a work setting, the loss, the death of somebody that we love, then do we not only feel the impact of that loss from that particular change, that particular death, let's say, but we're also likely carrying all the accumulated micro and sort of middle level losses that we've not done anything about. We've said, I don't have time for that. I'm going to push them onto the back of the emotional back burner, right? And I'm going to keep on trucking. Well, they haven't gone anywhere. They're just on the back burner. And when you come to those big losses, they're going to tend to come all to the fore. And if we haven't been thinking about, oh, you know what, I should really honor the little loss that I experienced in this. Maybe it takes just a second just to say to myself, I really love seeing that bird bath on my way to drop off my son to school every morning, right? And I'm going to miss that, but going this other way gives me the opportunity to, to see this thing that I never expected before. But just giving yourself that moment. And I think that'll not only help us be more honest with the variety of emotions that we experience kind of on the daily to begin with, but then may also make those more momentous losses, those more momentous changes, not have to do the work, right, of all that other loss and grief work that we've kind of shoved into the closet until it just comes spilling all out because we've tried to stuff one too many things in there. Is that helpful at all?
Absolutely. And I think grief, shame, all of these emotions and experiences, they compound each other, right? It's why we understand the impact of stress and trauma and grief and how it plays in all of these things, right? Is that when we continue to pack on or experience those things without having safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments to be able to validate and know that everything's going to be okay. It's why we see explosiveness, right? It's why we see kids with struggling with regulation and not understanding the impacts, right? And we go, I put a graphic out a couple weeks ago that said, I don't understand why adults don't understand why kids are so dysregulated. They are literally some of them have lived through a pandemic, losing loved ones, living through gun violence that is completely at a epidemic stance or a standpoint, dealing with all of the other social issues that are happening, because the difference between myself, you, and kids now is the accessibility to, they now know what's happening in the world.
Right.
And I love and am inspired by watching our youth see from a social justice equity standpoint and not afraid to use their voice, right? When I was a kid, when I was a junior, the genocide of Rwanda happened during my junior year of high school. I knew nothing about it till I was a grown adult because we didn't have accessibility to information like kids do these days. But that also can be a blessing and a curse. It's a lot of pressure that they're feeling. So if we're not helping them utilize all of these tools and as adults modeling with and for them over and over and over and over again, then we can't expect anything to change. I also want to get into, you said something and it really resonated with me, and I want to dig into it because people who have listened know that my mom passed away on April 10th, 2021. So it was just the second year anniversary. And It's interesting how grief and trauma can come up even when you don't realize that it's happening. It was interesting the year before my son woke up and said, no, he came over from school and he said, Dad, I felt nanny today. He had no idea it was the 1 year anniversary. Right. And that trauma, that trauma experience, and then just his ability to be in tune. Right. But you said something. What I want to know is, how do we validate the impact of grief on ourselves and others in the way that you just said? Because you said it so amazing, where you were like, I can honor that bird bath. Like, I can honor experiencing that, validate that I feel that it's not there anymore. And then that helps me continue to move. Talk more about that, because it's something I'm fascinated to know more about.
Well, I'm gonna, I'm not going to quote this as precisely as I want to, because it was a central quote to me for such a long time. But you mentioned Rwanda, and there is an amazing book by a reporter for the New Yorker about the Rwandan genocides, called "We Wish to Inform You That Tomorrow We Will Be Killed with Our Families." And there's a line towards the beginning of that that says, one of the most difficult things about existence is that we have to imagine what is in fact real, right? And I feel, and that has stuck with me, because from the outside, our work is to do the work to try to imagine what is in fact real for that other person, right? One of the things that I hear so often from folks when I'm having conversation with folks about their grief is, I have heard more than once, right, when people they talk about how much of a cop out it feels like to them when they have someone that they're talking to say, "Oh, I just can't imagine how that happened." When you talk with parents around mass shooting events, right, or with catastrophic events, and somebody from the outside says, I just can't imagine what that was like," and they mean it, they're trying to be very well meaning, but more than once I've heard how frustrated the person is. What do you mean you can't imagine? It happened, right? This is a thing that happened. My person is dead now. There's no need to imagine it. This is the reality. And so, and I was talking with somebody, and I said, one of the things that I want to be honest that I'm not in that person's experience, right? So I don't want to say, I know exactly how you feel, right? The worst, if you have to take one thing away from this podcast, right, and I'm sure you've heard it in some way, some shape or form in this conversation before, right, is don't ever say that, right? But it, building out from that then is, I want to honor the fact that I don't know. It's not my experience, but at the same time, I'm trying to do the work to know. So often I'll say with folks, you know what? I can't imagine, and I can only imagine what it is to have experienced what you are. And then the second part of that I will say is that, because it is not my experience and I'm doing the work of imagining what it is, that my job is pretty much to just validate their experience all the way through, right? And so when somebody says, I feel like I'm losing my mind, right? I keep on forgetting where my car keys are, and I set off for the post office, and I ended up at the grocery store, and then I didn't know exactly what I wanted at the grocery store, And then I went to the coffee shop and this song played, or the light came through the windows just this one way. And all of a sudden I was bawling, right? And I feel like I'm falling apart. I had one person say, who had been taking care of a parent who had Alzheimer's for years and years and years, who said, I felt like I needed to go get checked if it was starting for myself. And I said, I can't imagine, and I can only imagine first. And then I said, I think I'd be more worried if you weren't experiencing any of those things, right? You have been so intimately involved with the care of that person for so long. You've seen up close and personal exactly what they're going through. Their day has been your day. If we were in this conversation together and right now you said to me, no, everything's fine, I'm just moving along A-okay, that's when I would have more questions, right? That's when I would really be concerned. And I'm honest about that. I say, let's be open about what the emotions are. And to kind of, I lay all of that out to kind of get back to your original question about how we honor that for ourselves, because I think it's shut down and invalidated so many times by others outside of us that we don't do a very good job of doing those things for ourselves, right? We can say to ourselves, I think I should be more worried, or at least maybe not more worried, but at least say to myself, how do I really feel about this? And then to honor whatever feeling comes up and not to try to shut it down, right? It's the old mindfulness technique, right? Mm-hmm. That says, when you recognize that tough feeling coming in, to acknowledge it, mm-hmm. to say, I appreciate what you're offering in this moment, to the feeling. Mm-hmm. My mom went through 3 different rounds with breast cancer. She also had multiple myeloma, right? And she would talk about the different emotions she would have, different feelings she would have through that process, and saying, okay, anger, I hear what you're doing for me. You actually helped me in this moment get my point across to this doctor who I didn't feel was hearing me very well. But you've done your work. You've also let me know where part of me is at. And I thank you for your service, and you can kindly move on now, right? But we don't do those things well for ourselves. So, and they're not modeled well for us by others. So how in the world do we expect?
Well, and I think if we even look at the workforce, right? I mean, bereavement is 3 to 4 days. And then it's time to get back, right? And when my mom passed, I was off every other week going back and forth to St. Louis just to be there with my dad and my mom. And then I had to take time afterwards, unapologetically, because I just wasn't able to function, right? I wasn't able to get in there and do the work. And, over my time as a principal, I had a teacher lose an adult son in an accident. I had a family of 5 lose their father to gun violence. I had a child diagnosed with severe cancer and have to go through extensive chemotherapy. Since I've been gone, a teacher lost her life just over the winter break. When people say, why are you talking about this in the Trauma-Informed Educators Network podcast? And I'm going to tell you why. Because my second year of being a principal, there was a drive-by shooting out of the back gate of the school that I led. And the next day, we didn't say anything about it. And that was the worst thing we could have done, because not only was grief inside of the school, but fear was there. And we didn't acknowledge it. We didn't circle kids up and say, hey, did you all hear what happened? What are your thoughts? How are you feeling? Let's talk about what we do at school here to keep you safe, right? We didn't do any of that. And I lived so long with what were we thinking? And then I was thinking to myself, this is what schools do every time. They do it all the time. Just like the school shooting that just happened in Nashville. I guarantee you that next week, there were a lot of schools in our city that went back on Monday or whatever. I can't even remember what day of the week it happened. And and pretended that nothing happened, right? And grief plays a role in this too. And then the other piece that I want to bring up is William Bridges' work. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but he is in organizational change. And he talks about grief in the realm of organizational change. Grief takes on a lot of perspectives when you're talking about organizational change. And to be quite honest, trauma-informed education is about organizational change. It's about systems change, policy change, practice change. It's about all of it, because what we've been doing to kids isn't what we should be doing with kids. And he says that he sees grief coming out in, okay, so I no longer can do this and I have to do this, right? Because I know that's the right thing. There is a grieving process that occurs as this transition of your mindset for going from I have to get kids to behave and be quiet to I have to validate and uplift the voices of our kids. There's a grief process. And sometimes that grief process looks like sabotage. It looks like self-sabotage. It looks like organizational sabotage, because my comfort in that space is more important at times than the shift I know I need to make.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it so fascinating because I saw this over my principalship, where people will go through these processes of grief and losing practices that they know negatively impact children, and having to realize I can't use that anymore, but that's where I feel comfort. And watching this process, even myself as a school leader going, oh, like I'm so like overwhelmed because I can't just send the child home anymore, because I know that's not the right thing. And sometimes being angry about that, being frustrated about that, being sad about that, and then having to do what you said. Hold on a minute. Like, validate you're there. Okay. I understand why you're angry. The child literally just threw a chair at you and called you everything. But anger, you're going to go away. And here comes why are we doing what we do? Why are we connecting back? And so I didn't think about it when we talked earlier, but that process is how organizational change happens too. Is validating this, I'm really frustrated and angry right now, but that isn't going to change how I respond to what's happening. I'm going to check myself, keep myself regulated, self-regulation, so I can co-regulate, bring kids into my calm instead of being sucked into their storm, so that we can get to a solution to whatever is happening, right?
Yeah.
Whether that solution is, you know what, your dad was murdered in your front yard on November 1st, 2017, and this is the anniversary. Just come hang with me today. Let's just walk and talk. Let's just do things. It's those things that educators have to really begin to process, because if we ignore it, if we pretend grief doesn't occur, if for some reason, you and I talked earlier, we dehumanize children as if they don't have feelings like adults, and yet they have all of them, and sometimes even bigger ones, because they don't have lived experience. We have to start pausing that. And I think part of that shift is some additional work that you're doing, right? When validating the voices of all and hearing and being able to meet any student where they are and validating who they are and honoring who they are is such a powerful piece to why you are part of the Tennessee Equality Project. So tell me a little bit about the project that you're doing, are associated with, and just the work that you're doing.
I appreciate that, and you make a number of really stellar points there, and I'm going to touch on the teaching thing to be able to get to the Tennessee Equality Project piece here. So we're going to take half a step back to take a couple of steps forward, and that is to talk about if we believe that loss and grief are kind of happening all the time, then how we teach those that are under our tutelage, right? How we really think about a pedagogy of grief, a pedagogy of dealing with loss and hurt has to be central to almost anything that we do, right? Or at least knowing how we're going to integrate that with our lesson plan, because folks are dealing with change and transition and loss all the time. And if we're not modeling that well, right? And if we're not demonstrating, you were talking about co-regulating, right? The chaplain phrase for that is non-anxious presence, right? How do we be the non-anxious presence in the midst of a storm of emotions? Because we don't want to invalidate these emotions that are happening. They are real for the person they're happening for. And because they're real for the person they're happening for, like the thrown chair around the room, they're probably very real for us as well, right? But how do we then integrate our learning around that? Because we narrow our emotional range in so many ways, right? We're not allowed, and this, because so many gendered aspects go with our emotional range and our emotional expression, right? So the classic, boys don't cry notion. Well, you know, people carry that with them, unfortunately, to their grave, right? Or a type of stoicism. Well, I just have to get on with it. I have this work to do. And mom would always kind of buckle down and get on to the next thing. We know how those emotional patterns and those emotional models get replicated generation to generation. And what tools are we giving our children to then grow up with and deal with the variety of emotions that they're dealing with? And how are we validating or invalidating their emotions and their self-report along the way? And that becomes central, right? When then people are coming to the points in their lives when they feel like they need to relay something absolutely central and essential to who they are. But if they have been invalidated in the most basic of emotions, right? I hurt because this loss was important to me. Well, you just need to suck it up and keep moving. Or I know that 6 people in a school just 2 miles away just died, but we've got TCAP testing coming
Ugh.
up in a week, right?
Ugh.
So we're gonna keep on plan and keep on moving. If we're doing that type of invalidation, which I would say is small invalidation, but it's huge invalidation, right? So when people get to these points where they want to say, I have felt this disconnect. I've heard since I was a little girl that people joking, when Aunt Betsy would come around and say, "Who's your boyfriend now?" Right? And I always felt a little weird about that, and I always felt a little odd. Maybe when I had to go play baseball, right, and that didn't seem like a good fit to me. And then we squash that down because we're getting sent all these signals that we're supposed to squash down all the things that we're feeling about ourselves. And so then at the points that we really need to be honest with who we are and how we're feeling to keep ourselves from going past the point of no return, right? How have we set folks up for success? How have we set ourselves up to meet and interact with the genuine people that we need in our own lives to feel validated, when all we've given them is tools, and all that we've modeled is about how to be inauthentic selves, is how to be a facade of ourselves instead of being genuine selves. Yet all we all need is genuine selves. Before I was even this person with the very long hair, I know that Matthew probably every time he looks at me goes, where in the world did all that hair come from? Because folks who are out there in the world, I shaved my head for 26 years, right? But then I was the shaved, bald-headed chaplain with the earrings, and I would get questions from potential employers that said, how do we know that you're going to be able to meet the people out in name sort of boondocky place, Red Boiling Springs, or even outside of Red Boiling Springs, which is kind of up in the foothills of the Cumberland Plateau. How do we know you're going to be able to meet people there? And I say, well, first of all, you have to be able to ready to answer their questions, and then be also in the midst of answering those questions, show that you're there for them. Show that you're genuine in your regard for how and who they are in the world, rather than making it about your story. How often I hear from grievers and the folks that I talk with about how quickly the conversation comes about comforting them about your loss, right? How many folks are coming out in the world who are more concerned about the reaction of the person around them rather than trying to travel genuinely with the person that they are. So when you ask about the overlaps, it has to do with how have we taught and how do we live into the fullness of the genuine self that we need to be to come into relationship with anybody, to deal authentically with them, right? If I may, just to give an example, right? When came out, I've been married for just over 25 years. There is a loss cycle, a real deep grief cycle that I had to work to really try to honor that my spouse was going through, right? The person that she envisioned and really kind of walked through the notion every day, envisioning that she lived with, was not exactly what she had thought it was. I was not the person exactly that she thought I was, and trying to honor her need for grief space, right? While also trying to preserve living into this newness of my authentic self, right? Trying to still then preserve the space that I needed to come alive in a way that I felt I had never been genuinely able to live into, right? I think that for both of us, our explicit intentionality about the need for both of those things helped us weather a lot of that storm that absolutely would be, again, I would be more concerned if it wasn't a big thing to work through in a couple for that long of a relationship, because it is a big change. And with any big change comes big loss. And with any big loss comes grief. And so those things needed to be worked through. But being honest about them, being upfront about them, then allowed us to work through them and learn from each other's emotional places in ways that then helped us be more genuine with each other. Those lessons are directly applicable in pretty much any other setting that you go to.
And it made me go back to an episode a while ago, a long time ago, what you were saying. It was with Dr. Tracy Benson, who wrote Unconscious Bias in Schools. And he talks about how that our need to comfort somebody else from shielding others from how what happened made me feel is this detrimental part of our culture. And I think you and I have seen this playing out over the last several months, and most definitely the last several weeks, in our own House of Representatives, in our own legislature, where we now have some fiercely unapologetic truth tellers that have broken down any idea of your comfort is going to supersede my need to truth tell. That truth telling is making people uncomfortable, but our amazing representatives, Justin, um, are still in that space of, I have to tell the truth. This is how I see it. This is how it's been. This is how it's going. And your comfort isn't what I'm focusing on. And I know that isn't grief driven, but it is grief because you can hear it in their voice. You can hear the pain of the ancestors in their voice. You can hear the pain of their community in their voice. And I think you're right. And I think my hope and dream would be we can get to the point of people being their authentic selves without worrying about how it's going to come across to someone else. And boy, do we have a lot of work to do in that space. But my hope is we can get there, because, man, I can only imagine in so many levels how it is to navigate a world where I did when I was and grew up as an evangelical. I was terrified to disappoint anyone. I was terrified to say things that I had going on because I'm like, they're gonna think it's the devil. And really, I
Yeah.
just have questions. So, man, look at this. We are 46 minutes, and you have to talk about the Tennessee Equality Project. And we're going a little bit longer on this episode, and I love it because I think we get. Matter of fact, I'll just have you back, and we're just gonna have to keep talking,
Yeah.
because I just appreciate you so much and your thoughts, and you have got my brain spinning, um, like a whirlwind, and I love that. That's why I do this, because I love to think. But tell us a little bit more about the Tennessee Equality Project.
Sure. Well, Tennessee Equality Project got going during the first big push for marriage equality a number of years back. And the community network that it built, then it has kept going forward till now, and will need to go forward into the foreseeable future as communities that the what I often call the community of communities across the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, as they continue to try to find ways to live their fullest genuineness self in the world. And when they come across obstacles to that, particularly in the legislative sphere, particularly in that world of sort of code and policy, statute and policy, is really where Tennessee Equality Project has been intentional in focusing its efforts to make sure that the way, to steal from the neurodivergent and the autistic self-advocates movement, right? Nothing about us without us, right? And so one of the ways that I got involved initially with TEP was the executive director approaching me to ask if I'd be willing to talk about my experience as a competitive athlete, which is the way that I met Matthew, as a matter of fact, is in the world of cycling. And I'm still I'm not as active as I would like to be. Of course, none of us are doing the things that we want to be as much, especially when real work beckons and legislative sessions are hot and heavy all the time. But because the executive director recognized that what it would take, both for the moment and for the historical record, both to show the people in that room and also offer to the community at large, is a demonstration of showing up in these spaces which carry such charge and some fear, right? What it is to show up as one's genuine self, to say, this is who I am, this is how I experience the world, this is how I feel right now, right? When I hear this law that you're considering, I grieve for the way that that I see a future that will allow me less access in the public sphere in a variety of ways, that makes it more difficult to put sort of a fine point on it, right? That when the hospices that I've worked for serve a variety of counties throughout Middle Tennessee, right? It would take about 3.5 hours probably to drive from one end of a service area to the other, especially with Nashville traffic, right? But one of the latest ones I work with serves 8 counties, right? That's a variety of jurisdictions. And if from a legal perspective and a statute perspective, my ability to be present in any one of those areas, any one of those districts, right, is made increasingly questionable, then how can I go out and do the work of just wanting to support and be present with folks if I can't be sure of how this presence is going to be received in those spaces safely, right? And so the beyond the work itself being a demonstration, the work with TEP itself being a demonstration of what it is to show up with one's full emotional and physical, authentic and genuine self. It's also work that needs to be done for any of us to show up anywhere, just in a really practical sense, as the people that we are. You were referring to Representatives Pearson and Representatives Jones earlier. I would also add in Representative Johnson from Knoxville, who rightfully called out the racial lens on which their various expulsions were decided, right? But they are showing up as their authentic and full selves. And what lessons have that folk in the room been given about how to receive those varieties of selves and how to receive the variety of emotions that led to that charged moment? There were people grieving. You were talking about earlier about moms and they're hurting. Whew. The anger, the heartache, the loss, the distraught wails. How many representatives we've heard talk about the distraught wails of parents and mothers at this scene and any other number of scenes, and how they don't want to hear that again. That the energy of that emotion is carried over into the way they want to show up and show out, to speak out for what is going to serve their students well in the classroom from a teaching perspective, what's going to serve their children well from a community perspective, as far as being able to express their own senses of loss, right? Their own senses of challenge, and then how we deal with all of that legally as well too. So they're all implicated in one another. This whole episode, we've been talking about how do we validate people's senses of loss and change? How do we validate and work to create safe space and trusting space in which people feel they can really share how they're feeling rather than just defaulting to anger, right? You talk about emotional dysregulation. What lesson have we given them? Have we given any of ourselves in this world? We don't allow ourselves to be the only emotion that we allow ourselves to have is like a sports cheer and an angry, and an angry yell.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a lot of range, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to find ways to validate people's experience of themselves, their emotions, their worlds, because we're drowning. We're drowning in tears and we're drowning in loss that's going unrecognized. And we would come out healthier and I think more joyous if we just allowed ourselves the honesty of who and how we are in the world.
And I think too that is what our youth are asking for. And I think it's terrifying people. And I want to say that I was a dad there, and I was grieving. And I think again, all I ever hear about is grief. When I hear the legislators, they were grieving mothers and children, and I'm like, yo, I was there. Like, I grieve. I'm a dad. I'm a father. I grieve. I was grieving, and I was angry. I was really angry. And then when I was called an insurrectionist because I was simply just voicing my opinion, not only did I feel devalidated, but I felt attacked at that point, because all I was doing was standing there asking them to do something different, asking our lawmakers to do something different. And so I think you're so right. Is we are drowning in our own tears and our own frustration and anger and sorrow on both sides of the political realm, right? If we could come to this idea that we are all dysregulated and we have to come up with solutions that are human driven, human focused. Doesn't matter what human you are, just human focused. That things then maybe will change. And I do have hope. I really do have hope. And it's because of people like you. Literally watching you um, as someone I have respected for so long, but watching your vulnerability and listening to your voice, your authentic voice, standing in front of lawmakers, speaking your truth is something that I hope you understand impacts all of us, impacts and motivates all of us. I shared the video of you and I said, I'm so proud of this friend of mine. She's just, speaking truth that is fist in the air, like, yes, right? And I think that there's points in all of our opportunities that if we step into that space of being our authentic selves, speaking our authentic truth, without the worry of how uncomfortable I've never seen you be aggressive in those talks. I've seen you always just speak your truth with such honesty that it doesn't matter who the listener is, they cannot not hear it. And I think we have to be cognizant of that. We could speak our truth with confidence and joy and honesty. It doesn't have to be yelling at anybody. And there's been times I've had to do that. There've been times I've yelled. I'll be honest. I'm more of a firecracker most days. I get pretty fired up about stuff. But I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for all you've done um, for the state of Tennessee, for the kids across our state, for the kids across the world, because you're standing in your authentic space and you're speaking your real truth with such love and dignity. And it's amazing, and I appreciate it, and it inspires me. I've watched you grow and go. It's just amazing. But if people want to follow your work, where can they find you? If they want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. The place that I the place that I end up posting most often, where you'll get my little Instagram lives and so on if I'm down at the Capitol, is probably through Instagram, and that is DJ Contraption, aka Dahron J. If you just look up the spelling of my name, if you just look up Dahron, there's only like two of us in the world, and I'm there's some obvious indicators of why I'm this one and other people are the other ones. So you'll probably be able to find me there. And I get more into that TEP work in that space as well too, for all types of sort of HIPAA reasons and so on. There's less sharing about the day-to-day in this, but for the reasons that I've been saying, those works have that the work in both of those spaces have a lot of overlap and a lot of lessons to learn from each other about how to value our emotions and the emotions of our those around us equally, to not differentiate between the young person and the old person and the validity of their emotion, and what they are telling us that they experience of the world and of themselves. That applies to grief, that applies to equality issues, that applies just really across the spectrum. And that wherever I am, that's going to be something that I'm speaking to and trying to lift up.
Well, and always, if you all want to follow the Trauma Informed Educators Network, we are on now. We're on Facebook. We are on Twitter. I don't use Twitter as much as I used to. It's TIE Network PD. We are on Instagram. That's Principal List. If you want to follow me, if you want to follow the network, that is TIE Network PD. Haven't posted there a lot either. But LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn pretty often. Trauma Informed Educators Network on LinkedIn. And if you're not a member of our group, We are now over 32,000 people strong in the private group where we talk about all kinds of things. We share resources. We have somebody will say, does anybody have this? And next thing you know, people have already created all these amazing tools. So come join that. And as always, please, if you're a listener, just give us a review. If you don't know how podcasts work, the more reviews, they actually push the podcasts up in different places. And as I mentioned early on, we just surpassed, we're approaching 185,000 streams, which means we're going to hit 200,000 here in the next couple months, which I'm super excited about, you all. That means that it's getting out, it's getting across the globe. People are listening. And of course, there is no cost to any of listening of these, and there never will be. It really is just a resource. But as always, just as a reminder, go into the world and just do something awesome. All right, we're still live here on social media. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for those of you who commented. Lourdes Alvarez, Dr. Lourdes Alvarez Ortiz, thank you for always listening. You were a guest, and then you just come back to keep listening. So I really appreciate your engagement. Kaylee, thanks for being here. Barbara, thanks for being here. Jonathan, as always, it's great to have you on the podcast. But thank you guys. I will be back next week with Logan King. I cannot wait for you to hear from him. He does amazing work in inspiring youth to use their voice. So such a great transition to next week. But I will see you all next week, and have a great weekend.